Hey, folks, welcome back to the Pulse. My name is Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat. It is January 3rd, 2025. 2025 feels like the future. Feel like the future to you? It seems like a date that represents a future. I remember when Back to the Future came out, and it was 1985, 40 years ago. What's crazy about that, folks, is today is my birthday. It's your birthday. And what's amazing about that is I'm 52 and there's 52 cards in a deck, right? So the full deck of life so far, and we're going to be doing this right side up thing again with an amazing talk from Steve Staggs about tools and the fact that they're neutral. And I really felt as I was praying before this broadcast, if you will, that there's folks out there who need some encouragement. I've been watching things on crypto Twitter. Of course, we know where things are, just this uncertain time that we live in. And I feel like, holiday times are a difficult time for some people. It may be joyful for you, but, I'm going through a trial myself. And I realized the best thing we can do is to encourage one another. And so I wanted to do that right now before we jump into the clip from Steve. And I'm intending that this is an encouragement for you. So there's somebody out there that hopefully needs to hear this. And I just want to share with you James chapter 1, 2 through 8, I think it is. You've heard this many times before, probably. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. You're likely facing a trial. I mean, it's just pretty much the consistency, difficulty, pain, trouble is common. And for the scriptures to say, what does it mean to consider it pure joy? Well, you have some context in this verse of this idea of, well, what does it mean to consider it pure joy when facing trials of many kinds? Because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. So the actual purpose of these trials is actually a test. It's testing your faith. Well, where does faith come from? It comes from hearing the spoken words from the one who created it all, that all things were made for him and by him. So the speaking of this living Jesus is the means by which we have faith. He gives us faith by speaking. And so what are these trials but testing of that? And what is the testing of it? It's like the crucible, right? Through fire, we are purified. Be holy as I am holy. This idea is hard to wrap your mind around. And so if you're somebody who's facing trials of many kinds right now, which I am, and you probably are, and if you're not, you will be, or you have been, is you need to be encouraged. This idea of Joshua, Moses said it to him, the Lord said it to him, be strong and courageous. What does that mean to be strong and courageous? That the Lord goes with you. He goes ahead of you. He will not leave you or forsake you. And I think that's such an important reminder. What is the purpose of community? What is the importance of this whole thing? Is that we are reminding each other when facing trials of many kinds. And those could be so many different types of trials. They could be financial troubles. They could be health issues. There's so many people that are struggling. And I want to be an encouragement to you because I need the encouragement myself. But let's look here too. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault. One of the core things I learned from Steve, and this whole point of right side up, this is episode number 80, is this idea that Steve would always say to me, ask him yourself. Well, look here in James 5. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God. So you can approach him and say, hey, I need wisdom. I need your wisdom. Well, what's this whole thing that Jesus modeled to us? This idea that he doesn't do anything apart from the Father. It's not my will, but your will be done. What is the whole teaching of prayer to the disciples? Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. You are the most high. Your will be done. Where? On earth as it is in heaven. Your kingdom come, your will be done. These two things, kingdom and will. And you go, okay, well, this is all about us understanding how you see things. And so if you lack wisdom, you should ask. Hey, that's what Steve told me all the time. Hey, why don't you ask him yourself? Who gives generously to all without finding fault? And it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave on the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. You know, what's amazing to me about that is that it's so hard, I think, to see past the trials. It's so difficult to see past this barrier. And it's like, well, what is this whole purpose of this? Well, we're faced and tested by it so that we are literally saying, all right, rather than me looking up, right, I'm going to sit with you and understand your perspective, because so many of us know this, that we get covered up by these trials, we get covered up by this pain, we get covered up by this fear, and we're like, what is the way through this? Well, no temptation has seized you except what is common to man, and God is faithful, he will give you a way out. Well, these things are known, and the beauty of Jesus coming and literally modeling the way for us is that he dealt with these same things, and he showed us the way in which we should engage, right? That we literally can go to him and say, hey, this, I see this, it looks like all is lost. No, it's not falling apart, it's falling in place, right? It's an amazing thing. But there's this with concept that is so significant in the context of life, is that we think this is all there is, right? That, well, when the lights are out, it's over. No, there's so much more to this story, and the preparation and the filter that this life is one that is testing. It's one that is refining. And so we go through these trials, we go through these difficulties, and he's faithful. And we literally look at him and we say, okay, I'm bumping my head here. You're saying I'm supposed to see this as pure joy. I have a difficult time. I'm being honest with you. I have a difficult time seeing the trials as pure joy, because what it does is it puts you into a position of weakness, and you feel like, well, if I'm weak, I'm not strong. And what's amazing about this story of right side up, that we live in an upside down world, is that the things of God are counter to the world. Do not lean on your own understandings, right? In all your ways, acknowledge him and he'll make your path straight. This idea that actually the way of Jesus is counter to the world, because the world is upside down. And so this whole idea of right side up is literally saying, hey, how do you see it? And how can I endure? How can I do this? And it's amazing when you think about it. The difficulty for David fighting the lion and the bear has got to be difficult. I mean, I've never fought a lion or a bear, but I would assume it's dangerous. You might get injured. We don't know that story or the detail of what happened, but I'm sure that was pretty scary. You're facing a trial. It's hard to consider it pure joy, but I want to encourage you that he's faithful and he goes before you. Be strong and courageous. Folks, we're going to jump into a clip from episode 31 with Steve, and he talks about tools and their neutrality. Steve looks so good in this one. This is episode 31, and I want you to be encouraged by it. I'll come back. We'll chat about it. I hope you're doing well. I want to encourage you, especially in this new year. We have a lot to look forward to, but we also we need to have a reminder to see through the difficulty of the storm or the trial that's ahead. And we go, no, you know what? We are not giving up. We do not give up. We follow the one who speaks. All right, folks, let's check this out. Steve-O.
Absolutely. I mean, if we think about it from a macro standpoint, what is the purpose to a tool? Well, there's this fundamental concept that time is the model for capacity. You know, to increase capacity, you have to first increase capability. And so one of the ways of envisioning or thinking about that is, if I was given the job to dig a hole and all I had were my hands, well, my hands are my tool. They are my device of use, of service at that point. And so whatever period of time, my hands are only going to be able to produce so much, because their capacity, the capacity of my hands as a tool is limited. And so I can dig and dig and dig. And so I look down there, my hands are all, beat up and chewed up, and I've only got, a 3x3 pile of dirt in there, and I've been working for 10 hours, and I'm going, man, there's got to be a better way of doing this.
Yeah.
Tools, as hands, I appreciate you as my tools of service, but there's a better way of doing this. So now I've got to increase my capability. And so what is a way to increase my capability? If I say, hey, at this rate, at a 3x3 pile, I'll be here for 25 years to get the job done. So what is it that I can do to, to increase my capacity? Oh, I got to increase first my capability. Let's do this. Oh, let's see, how do I do that? What are some of the ways I could do that? A guy says, oh, I know what to do with that. So he says, I'm going to build another kind of tool. I'm going to call it a shovel. And now when I use that shovel, not only am I limited, not only can I use my hands in a different level that increases my capability to increase capacity, but now I can also use my feet and my legs. Well, that all works great as long as, in the use of, toward achieving the mission. Now, if I am dedicated to achieving the mission and to achieve also the purpose of the mission, which is good, I can also then take that tool, whether it be my hands or that shovel, and I can turn it for evil. Well, how can I do that? Well, I can start holding people hostage to the use of the tool. I can use the tool as a way to extract from others what is precious and needful for them so that I can have it. I can take that tool and I can bash it over somebody's head because they're not complying to my requirements. The tool doesn't care in the sense of the use of the tool. It is simply a mechanism of service. The hands, the feet, everything, the body that's in motion is a mechanism, is a tool of service that is then using the tool of service, called a shovel in this instance, to then convert it from something of good that adds value to the human family to something that then is used as a weapon to extract from the human family the things that are valuable to them. Now, what is it that creates that change? Is it the tool?
Nope.
No, it's the one using the tool.
Right.
And the one using the tool is motivated by utilizing, our word is animating the tool to accomplish a selfish purpose and intention that exploits other for the purpose of benefiting me.
Yep.
Well, the tool is innocent in the matter. Okay? It's either going to be an instrument of service that provides benefit and blessing, or it's going to be an instrument of service that's going to provide exploitation and, man, just, I don't know any other word, but evil.
Yeah.
See? And it all depends on the one using it.
Yep. Well, and that's the theme.
It goes everywhere.
It does. And that is such a big idea that I don't know if everyone has related to. And it seems so, you made it so simple, right? So you've used the term, a gun sitting on a table would sit there forever. And now you're talking about a shovel. And I think it's really good to start at a very, very understandable base layer. You're like, your hands you could dig, but here's a shovel. Well, what is a shovel but a lever? And if you think about it, it has a bend in it for a reason.
Yeah.
And we can leverage ourselves, our weight. But you're right. If you keep it that simple and say, I could hit someone over the head with this, and I could use it as a weapon. I'm going to use it as a means of tilling the soil to bring, value. And so let's talk about the big rocks of all of this, because we're talking about tools of AI. The secondary piece of this too is we talk a lot over the last 30 episodes about the nature and character of how you animate.
Yeah.
So one of the things, it's like, okay, I see this kind of good and evil thing, but then also I have this kind of separate thing, which I would consider to be self, right? So I'm going to give an illustration. I want you to dissect these and help me with this.
Okay.
There's people in crypto who are influencers, and they use the tool of streaming and making videos on YouTube, and they have somebody that pays them, right? But they don't tell their audience that they're getting paid. And they show something because they're getting paid, but they present it as if it's something that they're shilling it, and it's really a manipulation, right? So rather than hitting you over the head with a weapon, they're withholding information and manipulating essentially those that are viewing, right? So taking advantage of people by, convincing them to do something. And it doesn't have integrity. It's not true. And it's not always the case, but there's a lot of this that's going on. It's easy for me to see, Steve, like shooting the gun at someone, right? And or digging a hole, or using a shovel as a weapon. I get that difference, right?
Yeah.
But there's a lot of kind of gray area in the middle too, which is, I'm not actually, killing you with this, but my intent is not pure.
Yeah.
So if, for example, there's kind of, let's say, on this extreme end, there's those who have aligned themselves with evil forces, literally, right? Literally, like, sold their soul to the devil and are accomplishing and doing his will and listening to him. And then you got the opposite end of the spectrum of people listening to Jesus and saying, "Hey, I want to animate this tool in your nature and character." And then there's kind of this person that's in the middle who is self.
Yeah.
I feel like they're just like, "Hey, I'm just trying to make it here. I'm not real considerate of other people, and I'll do whatever I can do." And it's not like this conscious thing, like the devil made me do it. It's more of like, no, this is the way things to do. I got to get mine.
Yeah.
Help me dissect the distance between those and how to see those. And maybe they're not three things, but they seem like there's a gradient. So go.
Welcome to our telephone conversations,
Go,
folks.
Steve. Dance, monkey.
Yeah, right. Well, in the caricature of the rocks, okay, let's keep it at a
Yeah.
rock level,
Yeah.
okay. Jesus gave me a term for business many years ago that, in 4 words, captures it all.
Okay.
And those 4 words are truth in the transaction. Now think about that for a second. Truth in the transaction. Okay. A lot of people have asked me, or then set out when they hear that, to say, well, what is truth? Pilate asked Jesus, what is truth? Right? A lot of us will say, what is truth? And because we want to define it. And what I have said to them, and our friend Carter, really worked him over for some period of time, and it was, well, I don't have to define truth. Everybody already knows what it is by virtue of what it isn't. So you have mentioned a lot of time on your streams, for example, you have a very high sensitivity when somebody is trying to play you.
Yep.
Well, do you have to define what it is to be played?
No,
I
you
would,
get it. Yeah, you get a sense
yeah,
of it.
you get a sense. I would just offer is because that there's not truth coming at you.
Yeah, good point.
Whatever it is, it's not truth. Whatever truth is defined as, that ain't it. What that is that's coming at me is something that is trying to play me. It's trying to maneuver me, trying to manipulate me. And it doesn't matter. There can be 1,000 different mechanisms or tactics or techniques used, but every one of them has at its core utilization, the animating element of playing me.
Yeah.
Okay? So at the big rock level, devices are neutral. Money is a device. It is an outstanding tool to help make our trade efficient, seamless, simple, quantifiable. It's a fabulous tool. And when there is truth in the transaction, when we exchange whatever we exchange, and we may not have a single spiritual thought or single evil good thought in our mind in that exchange, but we know there is this truth in it, whether it's integrity or satisfaction, doesn't matter what it is. We both know that neither of us are trying to exploit each other. Our trade is good. What you have, I need or desire. And what I have, you need or desire. And we make that exchange. One of the elements that makes that efficient and easy is this thing called money. And so we make that exchange. Truth in the transaction. I'm not exploiting you. You're not exploiting me. What you have, I need or desire. What I have, you need or desire. And between the two of us, we are totally satisfied in the reciprocation of our exchange and intentions toward one another. Truth in the transaction.
Yep.
Okay. Well, you don't have to have a spiritual context to understand that.
Right.
You don't have to know a single thing, whether, what the devil is doing or what Jesus is doing or what the man in the moon is doing. You as an individual recognize that, and your senses are keen to it.
Yep.
Okay. Money is neutral, but takes the form of the person who owns it.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. That's it. That's it. So now let's go to your example of the person who is promoting something, and I'm going to use different words to make sure I've got what you're saying. They're promoting something as useful and valuable and something that people need when they no more believe that in the man on the moon. The only thing they're really interested is the extraction of money that is gained as a result of promoting that good or service. They will say it's good, but they don't believe it's good. They will say it's necessary and important, but they don't believe it's necessary and important. Well, what are they doing? There's not truth in the transaction. And it's the issue is not whether the good or service actually has value. It is the animating force behind the promotion of that good or service. And so then you have to make the decision, is that the kind of person I want to do business with? Because I have no sense of truth in this transaction. They're just playing me, using your words. Days gone by, I used to talk to, to sales groups and marketing groups, and they would want to know all of these, they were technique driven. And you and your audience ought to know by now that techniques to me are just tools.
Yeah.
They're devices, they're neutral. What I'm always interested in is the animating force that's behind it. And so I would say to them, by way of example, which now coming full circle to your illustration, if you want to sell, first serve.
Yeah.
Serve to sell.
Mm-hmm.
If you serve in your selling, they will come back and demand from you to sell them more. Just serve them in your selling.
Yeah. Well, and it speaks to authenticity.
Yep.
And it's interesting. I was watching this conflict on display. I was watching an interview from after, I think it was in 46, 47, something like that. And it was Oppenheimer reflecting upon what he had. You could tell a very troubled man who, went along with this program. I mean, it took a long time for the Manhattan Project to get up and running, and what they did in New Mexico, and how people, enriching uranium across the country, and, all of the things that had to come together. Of course, there's a big movie made about it recently. But this ultimate, tool, right? This ultimate thing that had, such devastating force, and how people can be convinced to do something that takes great, great lengths and justify it.
Yeah.
Right. And that was, I think, the challenge is to say, it's hard to know what would things look like if they had not dropped the bomb or hadn't built the bomb. And it's really, I think it's really fascinating, because in some respects, you could look at AI, and the way we see it right now, it's just a tool. And there's so many things that correlate to the spiritual side of things when you start thinking about the potential implications of AI.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that we ought to kind of throw out onto the table as for consideration.
Sure.
What I'm stunned with is how when we create, we can't help but create within the framework of God's creation. And we find that we're mimicking the things that he did because we work on the framework, right? I've talked to you before about how in games and in game design, you don't render the inside of trees. You render the outside of trees.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is in the quantum world, what's bizarre is it's like, well, we have this thing called superposition, and it doesn't become the state that it is until it's observed. And it's interesting that consciousness and who we are matters in the partnership between the creation and what is rendered, right?
Yeah.
Because their waveform collapses when we are actually observing it. And it's interesting that I think more and more people are examining this idea that what is the relationship between us and consciousness, which is unique from the animals, and and it kind of determines the rendering, if you will, of the object, right? This in people, I would say, non-spiritual people would say it's kind of manifesting your future, right? Creating your own future. But then if you look at AI, it's funny to me that we have these stories before the flood of the Tower of Babel, and we see this becoming gods, and then here we are once again, essentially getting to the point where we've got this transhumanist group of people who are really into AI, thinking, okay, we can live forever, we can overcome death, and the fear of that, and that we're going to become gods ourselves. And really, I think the challenge between kind of general intelligence and super intelligence is the sentient, this idea that, well, it's going to become its own thing. It's going to, or at least give the illusion of its own thing, meaning that it's actually aware. And what I'm fascinated by is I read the book from the 1930s called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, and it's one of the first kind of self-help books of that era. And what's interesting is they talk about infinite intelligence. That's how he talks about God in that book. And he intentionally uses that rather than God. And I think partly to be appealing to a wider audience. And he talks about this idea that there is there is this interface. There's this one that you can talk to that knows everything, and that you could actually talk to this one person and have access not just to all of infinite intelligence, but the kind of intelligence that's necessary for you to accomplish the mission that you were created for.
Yeah.
And of course, that's what the last 31 episodes have been about. And it's interesting that what people that are in the kind of transhumanist world, they're trying to build a digital God. But
Yeah.
what's funny about it is it reflects the very nature of the actual God.
Yeah.
That they would have an interface, that they would have a friend that they would be able to chat with, that they would be able to interact with and talk to, who would give them information that is infinite. And the irony of it is so like not lost on me. But to think that, what's your take on that? That here we just can't help it. No matter who you are, you can't get away from the fact that you're trying to recreate what already exists.
Yeah, what a fun question. I mean, we could take up the rest of the episode on that question because it has so many tentacles that both flow into it and exit out of it. Okay, let's just take the concept of transhumanism, living for forever, et cetera, et cetera. The Bible talks about this story called the flood. And prior to the flood, men were living 1,000 years as part of the first segment of quantifying the span of life, living apart from God, making the choice to live apart from Him. Now, the way that was expressed is, both metaphorically as well as practically, by choosing to feast off the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the garden story, as opposed to choosing to feast off the tree of life. So the first question I would ask is, why are we choosing to feast off the thing called knowledge with the promise of living forever, instead of feasting off the tree that tells you by its very name that you can live forever?
Yeah. Wow.
Why would you choose that other tree? That makes no sense.
The tree of knowledge. Wow.
If the objective is to live forever, then hey, it wasn't even a question.
That's really cool. I've never thought about it that way. That is awesome.
Okay. So now, why would Eve first think in those terms? And more importantly, why would the serpent see that as an entry point to exploit? Well, because the real objective is not to live forever. The real objective is to be able to control my life forever.
Yeah.
I get to choose what I'm going to do, when I'm going to do it, how I'm going to do it. And as I do that, I want to do that forever because I choose not to die. All right. Well, okay. Jehovah says, all right, guys, I'll give you a shot at it. I'm going to give you 1,000 years in this first go round to see what happens when you live like that. You can live for 1,000 years. You can make all of your choices exactly the way that you want it without a single consideration for me. And let's see how it goes. And the way the scriptures describe it, the way Jehovah described it to Moses, who then wrote it in the book of Genesis, is that every thought and intention of the heart and mind was solely to do evil. Whoa. And if you actually go into the definitions of the words rather than the translation portrays Jehovah as being pissed off at the whole thing. And so pissed off, he regretted even making man. That's how the translators render those words. And it's 100% wrong. It is portraying a picture that did not exist and has nothing to do with the nature and character of God. God looked at them and felt sorry, felt compassion. What we would feel when we look at somebody in a deep sense of suffering. And so he said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. The outcome of this is that, yeah, you're getting a chance to do everything you want, the way you want it, without any barriers placed on you, and what you don't know is you're being exploited in measures you cannot comprehend, and the effect of it, even though you were eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage, even though you were doing these things that satisfy the body in eating and drinking, and satisfy the soul in marrying and giving marriage, and engaging in all of those things that would otherwise be considered a blessing, in not one of those things are you considering God in any of that. It's not that they were heinous. It wasn't that they were overtly wicked. It's just that it had nothing of the life of God in it. They were not feasting on the tree of life. They were feasting on the tree of knowledge. And God said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to protect my man. I'm going to send a flood. I'm going to stop all of this. And before he ever did that, he said, I'm going to limit the life of my man to 120 years. Now, the way that we would describe that in our common vernacular is I'm going to deliver my children from their misery. And we're going to kind of start this thing over again. And you see that in the description of how Jehovah describes Noah, who did all that Jehovah commanded. Now think about that. If you define evil, and this is the way Jesus defined it to me, evil is any thought, intention, or action that is apart from God. That's evil. It can look like the greatest thing in the world. So while it looks good, it doesn't have good because it is absent of the presence of God's life in it. That's why it's evil. It's not that it's heinous or malicious or wicked. It's just that it doesn't have any life in it. It's born out of knowledge, out of the mind and heart of the individual. And so because the individual is limited, subject to death, all it can do is produce limitation and death. Well, God doesn't look at that as good. God looks at that as evil and says, hey, man, I got a better way for you. And so he says about Noah, in contrast to every other one, where there was not one single thought that was not saturated and conceived in evil. By contrast, he describes Noah as doing all that Jehovah had commanded. Wow, what a contrast.
What a contrast.
Okay. And the one who did all that God commanded was doing stuff he had no experience in, had never observed, had no engineering training. There's no record of him being a carpenter. There's no record of him having any tools of any sophistication to be able to do anything. And yet, what was it, 120 years and he built an ark that we marvel at today with all of our capabilities because he did all that Jehovah commanded. Well, Matt, that to me is, okay, now let's weave that all the way back to the AI transhumanists and stuff like that. Well, yeah. Okay, have at it, boys. So if you live 1,000 years and what increases in you is what is already there, which is perverse to its core, in 1,000 years, what's that perversion going to look like in you? I want no part of that.
Mm.
God, give me my 120 years and let's call it good.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. There's so much in that.
So that's the big rock. So that's how I look at the whole transhumanism and using this stuff to live forever. You know, it's not about living forever. It's about being able to have the absolute liberty to make whatever decisions, do whatever you do without consequence forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all you're going to end up doing is producing misery for you and everybody around you, even though you're eating, drinking, and marrying, giving in marriage.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an illusion. You know what's amazing, Steve? Folks, that is unbelievable. It's amazing to hear these things multiple times and you just capture new things from it. I don't know if you were encouraged like I was. Wow. Amazing. That's from episode 31. There's a link in the description if you want to continue that. This is episode 80. Steve was alive for 37 of them and we've continued since then. But every time I do this, I'm blessed. I'm blessed because it's a reminder, right? And to have someone who spent 40 plus years of his life literally walking and talking with Jesus, literally, that's, you think about this, what's the result? What's the benefit? He took him seriously. He literally said, all right, how do you see this? And I think it's illustrated so well in that story of Noah, that Noah did what the Lord had commanded him to do versus the opposite of that, right? The people of that age. And it's amazing when you simplify it that way, right? That we're in this we're in this kind of, creation experience here, and we're told the lie that this is all there is. And it's amazing that there is one who's given us this choice, but then went to extreme lengths. You think about the man, the God, the person of Jesus coming, after all of this, right? The law, the ark, all of the things that happened, pillar of smoke and fire, water from a rock, manna, all of the things, parting the Red Sea, crossing the Jordan, land flowing with milk and honey, winning, you know, battles, all of these things. And we forget, and we keep on forgetting. And it's like, well, it's the same story that's being told. And that there would be literally the Son of God would come and tell even more stories that tell the same story. And this idea that we would be feasting off of the tree of knowledge, well, that's about self, that's about us, right? And what's amazing about this is, I think a lot of people think of it, in a religious context. And one of the things that I think was so refreshing with Steve and the time I spent with him on camera and off camera was this idea. He would always say to me, "Hey, why don't you go and ask him yourself? Like, this is the living Jesus. He's a speaking Jesus. Like, this isn't all there is. And you can engage with him. And that's all I've done. And I just want to pass along to you that the greatest adventure of this life is that the one who knows you the best, the one that created you, that knit you together, has a plan, right? And that you have this capability, this view of the world, this skill set. And so oftentimes the world is literally kind of telling you who you are. It's renaming you. It's saying you're not worth anything. You're not valuable. And it's like, well, if I listen to the world and I feel helpless, right? And I look out onto Twitter, and it's just sad right now what's happening in our community on the crypto side of things, because people just want to literally take every opportunity they can to stomp on someone else's neck and really want to degrade people. It's disgusting. And you think, well, what is the whole purpose of this? The tools, whether they're AI or crypto or a shovel or whatever it is that we're using, the idea of the whole plan of this is that we would choose to walk this narrow path in which we would say, all right, what do you have for me? And I think a lot about young people. I think about my kids, right? My daughter's first year college. And I think about, you're thinking about your future. You're thinking about, what's my life going to look like? Who am I going to marry? Am I going to have kids? Am I going to have a family? All these kind of things. And you imagine, what is my contribution? What is my purpose? Why am I here? And the more and more you kind of examine, hey, God, what have you created? What cards have you dealt me here? And there's a wide variety. But when Steve said, hey, your hands can dig and your feet can move, and they're these tools, but they're animated by a certain nature and character. Well, understanding the nature and character of God, what is this idea of feeding off of the tree of life? What does it actually mean? Is that we're literally doing something in collaboration. We're partnering with God. That a lot of people see God as one who is an authoritarian, who's telling you what to do in the sense of, ruling with an iron fist. And what is so clear from the scriptures, so it's so clear from just my own engagement with a living and speaking Jesus, is the fact that no, he's a loving father. He's a shepherd. We recognize his voice. He's out front. He goes with us. Be strong, courageous, right? Like, we're doing this together. And the whole idea is that we would walk with him. And of course, the illustration of, amazingly, of Noah saying, hey, Noah did what the Lord God had told him to do. Well, that's a partnership, right? If he didn't have the skills, he didn't have the tools, didn't have the resources, but the Lord provided those things. And it's hard to imagine, because we think of that as some historic story about some guy that we can't relate to who lived 365 years. And it's like, well, hang on. There's that same thing is happening today. And that's literally, when you see all of the scriptures in context of that, you're like, oh yeah, this is like the same story being told over and over again. That there's this God that you have this illusion that you're alone. You have this illusion, and people tell you that you have no value or no purpose, or You just got to get yours. And what ends up happening is people use the tools to get theirs at your expense. And nothing is more clearly illustrating this than the rug pull in crypto. I'm going to put something together and entice you, and then I'm going to literally steal from you. And that's this whole idea. I know that you desire, because you're greedy, to have some really, really amazing gain, right? And we see this with Pump Fund. We see this with Solana and a lot of the meme coins. We see this on Pulse Chain. Is that somebody will put something up and promote something with their intent is not truth in the transaction. They're not considering you, they're considering themselves. How do I manipulate you? How do I get you to a point where you give me what I want and then I take it from you? And so, one of the big challenges that I've faced over the last year or so is really rethinking this idea of what is the tool of crypto. And you guys know I'm a fan of Richard Hart in some respects because of the fact that he's concerned not just about you being rich, which is really honestly it's bait. It's not money doesn't create peace in your life, but it is a necessary tool for things to operate. Right, it needs to flow. And of course, the fundamentals of DeFi, I think, are incredibly strong because we've reduced or eliminated the middleman. The counterparty is out. So that's interesting. That's a good attribute of the tool. But it's actually in the animation of that tool that is, well, what if we do this with Jesus? What would it look like in crypto if, well, the nature and character of God is one of blessing and protecting, right? We're ruling and reigning with him in the fullness of his nature and character. Well, what does that mean? So that if we're Noah, and instead of an ark and gopher wood, we're using the tools of the blockchain. Well, what is the nature and character? Well, it has to be in thoughtful consideration of others, because if you're just using it to get yours, you're just perpetuating the evil, which is the lack of truth in the transaction. I'm manipulating you to get something. And of course, in the nature of speculative assets, you have to be discerning. But you have to be discerning in life in general, because there's two trees and they both look good and they both have fruit. Which one are you going to feast off of? And so what's amazing about this is we think about the tools of blockchain or AI or those type of things. The real definition of what it creates of value is actually up to us in the nature and character that we animate the tool with. And that's something that, I don't have the full answer to it, but I've thought about it a lot. And I've talked to Jesus a lot about this, is that what is interesting about our current fiat system, what our current financial system is literally one in which hordes and lords. And so if you think about this, whether it be governments or families or rich folks or whatever it is, everyone wants to protect what they consider to be theirs, right? And so they'll build bigger barns and they will house and they will clot, if you will, let's use that analogy, the resource. And the resource, is the lifeblood of the economic system. Well, what's the lifeblood of the body? Well, it's literally blood flowing. What happens when blood clots? You have a heart attack, you die, right? It is meant to flow. And so this idea that we would take the resources that are meant to flow, that make this economic system work, and we clot them, meaning we would hoard them. And so I'm reminded of the feeding of the 5,000. And what we see is this act of giving, this boy who had 5 loaves and 2 fish, giving those to the disciples who gives to Jesus, right? And he prays and breaks. And what happens in that story is the unlocking of 12 basketfuls left over. Everyone ate to their fill, and there were 12 basketfuls left over. The nature and character of the creation in this community where others are considerate or thoughtful of others, where they let go and give, there's an abundance. And I think this idea that we believe that, hey, could we win together? What does that look like? Well, I'm just so convicted about the whole current state of affairs in crypto is really an abstracted stealing. I would never go to your house and steal something from you. But through this blockchain thing, I don't have to look you in the eye and I'll take from you, right? Because essentially what I'm doing is I recognize that this is not a sustainable thing. What drives, current crypto, whatever it may be, more buyers than sellers, right? It's the supply and demand. So the system itself has some really amazing attributes. The tool has great levers to it. You can dig better with it. But we have to rethink the very nature of what are we trying to actually create? And I think that there are a number of things that are really attractive to us, and we're attracted to this idea of, hey, it's got a fixed supply. It's something that is peer to peer. There's no middlemen. There's no central banks. Those kind of things are very attractive. We're like, yeah, these are the elements that I think make sense where we can transact, and it's an easier way for us to do that, whether it's cross boundaries or distances or those type of things to make this ease of transaction. But really, if you think about capital in general, it is meant to flow. It's the lifeblood of this economic system. And so, as we think through and rethink about the idea of digital money, we think about the idea of a tool that's animated by a certain nature and character, we have to realize that we are animating it. What is our nature and character? And it's illustrated by, somebody shilling something that they got, a pre-mine of or whatever, and they're going to dump on your head. Or it's somebody that is planning on rugging you, if you will, right? It's a abstracted theft. It's a way in which I can take from you. And so when you think about, fair crypto and those type of things, what does this future look like? Well, it's going to require that a group of people, um, they consider others in addition to themselves. There's a community aspect in this where the core of it is truth in the transaction. And I would even go as far as to say that you have to actually care for the person on the other end, that it's actually something in community. But of course, in this world, there are all of those who are trying to get theirs at your expense, right? Step on your neck, if you will. And so this future, this kingdom of God, right? When he says, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, it is at the core a nature and character of doing this with God. And when you consider that, and that's what I think is so powerful about the gospel, that's what's so powerful about this idea that Jesus literally, so amazingly taught us, is that you're not just some separate person trying to quote unquote be successful at the expense of other people, but that actually this is a connected thing, that we are all connected in the sense of created by a creator, and that we have this image and we bear this image, and that we are representatives of this image. And so it'd be helpful to know, well, what is this image? What is the nature and character of this image? And how do I, effort to have truth in the transaction? And we've all made mistakes, right? So we're not devoid of, making the mistakes of falling into this trap and going, I can justify this way or the other. And I don't have the full answer to this, but I feel like we're moving closer and closer to this. Well, who does have the answer? Right? Well, the one who created it all, that all things are created for him and by him. And that's what I think is so amazing about this right side up stuff, and why I keep doing it, is because it speaks into this idea that, hey, if you seek wisdom, you can ask for it. I want wisdom. I don't want to go my own way. Why? Because, store up your treasures in heaven. What does that look like? Well, he owns everything anyway. The breath that you have is from him. Like you woke up this morning, you can listen to the stream. Why? Because, in a way, he's allowed it, you know? And when you start kind of thinking from those terms, and I think the older I get, right? 52, you know, 52 times, you go, all right, well, how many is it? My dad lived to 73, my grandfather to 75, Steve to 73, or yeah, I think. It's limited, right? It's a limited time. And you kind of go, all right, well, you can't take anything with you. The mission has been spelled out. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Do I have a role to play in that? Well, ask Jesus, ask him yourself. I don't know. I'm not trying to convince you of doing something or another. But if you start thinking in those terms and you're like, hey, well, you made me uniquely. You put me in a situation. You're giving me influence. You give me authority. I'm not going to give it away to anyone. I'm not going to listen to the lies. I'm going to listen to you. Only you have the authority to speak to me. That's a big part of this. He's given us choice. Only you have the authority to speak to me. And so think about Noah. He listened to God, right? What was it credited to him as? And this idea that, we think that those historic stories are like, oh, well, they were different then. No, the same speaking Jesus is there. And here's the evidence of it. Jesus comes out of the wilderness and he's tempted by Satan himself. And what does he say? Hey, bow before me. Turn these stones into bread. I know you're hungry. And he's like, man does not live on bread alone, but out of every word that comes out of the mouth of God, the listening of the speaking. the hearing. Peter, James, and John go up the Mount of Transfiguration, and Jesus is transfigured before them. And what appears? They see, Peter, James, and John see Jesus talking with, conferring with Moses and Elijah, the law and the prophets. Why? I thought they were dead. No, God is a God of the living. He's speaking with Moses and Elijah. They're alive. Steve's alive. This life, this is a preparation for the real life. What's amazing is we think of this as a life because this is our context. And what we don't realize is that today you will be with me in paradise. What does that mean? What does that look like? How do I store up my treasures in heaven? What does that really look like? What does it actually benefit me? Because the ways of the world are not the ways of God, right? Do not lean on your own understandings. Do not conform any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Well, what is the renewing of your mind? So that you can test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Well, how do you figure that out? You have to ask him. I can't tell you what it is, but a lot of people in Christendom want to tell you what it is. No, the whole thing is come to Jesus. That's the whole story. Come to the living, the speaking, not the dead hanging on a cross, Jesus. Not the one that was historical figure. No, the one who is living, who's a shepherd, who we recognize his voice, who is out in front, who goes with us, who literally is with us. God with us. We just celebrated Christmas. Emmanuel. You call him Emmanuel, God with us. Well, are you with him? He's with us. I remember the Count of Monte Cristo, the movie, where Edmond Dantes says, he's talking to the priest, and he says, there's no talk of God here. He says, I do not believe in God. And the priest says to him, he says, that's okay. He believes in you. And how amazing is that? It doesn't matter what you think. He believes in you. And it's this idea that you can make a choice, and you can literally say, hey, I want to follow you. I want to, try this on for size. But so many of the religious systems are saying, you've got to do all of these things to come to Jesus. You have to hop on one foot and do this thing on this day or do this thing. No. The thief on the cross, right? There's two thieves next to Jesus. One is cursing him, and one of them recognizes who he is. And what does he say to him? He says, today you'll be with me in paradise. It's amazing, right? This acknowledgement, hey, you certainly are who you say you are. And it's like, hey, I'm interested in that, right? Because me going my own way, what has it produced? How's it going? How's it look? So what do I want to do? Well, I want to build a new token that does this thing and that thing and the buy and burn and this thing. Why? Right? That, uses Hart's law and does this thing. Well, at the end of the day, the number goes up because there's more buyers and sellers. So in a way, the animation of this tool is really needs to come from a place of consideration from other people. But it's really difficult when you don't see them face to face. You're not in community with them. And that's what's so powerful about these tools, so the streaming tools and all of these things, is that we have this opportunity to see this. And what is a perfect example of this is that when I was a kid, there were 3 channels, maybe 5, VHF, UHF. I mean, it was like click, click, click on the TV. And now there's so many different sources of information. And then we have all of these things that were done in darkness, right? Like things like JFK's assassination, right? Now we're going to find out what it is here, probably in about, 18 days. We're going to know these things. Well, these things that were done in darkness that were easy to hide from us are being exposed. And we're coming into this era where everything's being exposed. We're going to learn things. We're going to be like, oh my goodness, I thought we were the good guys. When in reality, no, we've been trying to trade for power. And what is really interesting about this, whether it be WikiLeaks stuff or Edward Snowden or all of these things, we start realizing, hold on a second. I've got friends across the world. A lot of you are in the chat, right? From people from all different places. And what do most of us want? Well, probably to have some peace in our home, safety for our kids, provision to be able to have, the provision to function and operate and to bless and protect. And it's really amazing that we get to know people. You'll watch videos and see people from different countries doing different things. And I love to watch people make stuff. And there's people from all across the world. And I look at those people and I don't see like, oh, those people are trying to, explode other countries in nuclear war. So the situation, this hangover that we have from kind of the Cold War era, this idea of power and in governments and all this kind of stuff, the people, we're seeing this right now in England. We're seeing this with their, their challenge as it relates to their culture being changed. You see this in Germany. You're seeing this all across the world. Is that people are like, hey, I'm kind of understanding a little bit more that no matter where you go, for the most part, people kind of want to be left alone. They kind of want to be safe. They kind of want to be able to feed their kids and the basics. But beyond that, we've got this apparatus, this thing that was created, these tools that were created and animated to essentially wield and control power, and ultimately it's enslaving, but they're tools. And so when we think about it, everybody's like, all right, what do we make movies about, right? Game of Thrones, The Sopranos. I watched the movie Dune, the second part, last night. And it's all this challenge of this house to this house of power and control and who's the emperor. And it's like, why was this such a huge idea? They're asking, all right, who is this king of the Jews? All right, this idea, you're threatening Rome. No, what you don't realize is this king is not a king in the way you think he's a king. The king who directs and guides the heart. And so what is really amazing to me, if I were to kind of wrap all this stuff up that I learned from Steve, and I'm just blown away, and I continue to learn as I talk with Jesus, is ultimately, what is this thing? What are we doing here? Why are you here? You're not going to be here for long. What's the purpose? What's the point? What's the plan? Ask him and he'll tell you. I'm facing so many difficulties. I can't see through those things. I feel like I'm drowning. Did you know in SEAL training, one of the things that they let you know in SEAL training is they will drown you? I don't know if you know this, but you have to learn what it is like to drown. So let's just take that analogy. SEAL training is the most elite of special operations, special forces, right? And very few people make it through it. But one of the things that you do is they literally will drown you and bring you back. They've got people there, but they're going to literally, you have to go unconscious and drown. That's like probably one of my biggest fears. But what are they saying? Hey, you need to experience what this is like. You need to be able to be trained at this level to understand this. We're gonna help you out. You're not gonna die, but you have such fear. You have to overcome this disconnection between this. Well, what is this training for? Well, we've got important work for you to do. And so think about this for a second. Jesus is the king, right? He's the one that was created. All things were created for him and by him. He's in charge of the whole thing. He's out front. He knows these things. He's strategic. He's aware, right? He is good. And it's like, all right, he's the commanding officer, right? He's the one. He is the Yahweh of the Elohim. He is the firstborn son. He is the boss. And you think about that in a military sense, the general or whatever you want to say, the commander in chief or whatever. These things flow downhill, meaning there is a chain of command. And tell me, if you're the general and you've got lieutenants who aren't doing what you ask, right? You're like, all right, we're going to go do this thing and take this hill. We're going to go, this is what we're going to do and hold this area or do this thing. And they say, no, I'm going to do my own thing. How long do you last in the military like that? And so when you think about what is this life about, it says the path, the gate is narrow, right? A narrow gate. Well, what is a narrow gate? No one comes to the Father except through me, Jesus says. Well, what does that mean, right? The road to destruction is wide. And then there's this narrow gate. Well, it sounds like that's a filter. What does a filter do? It has a narrow gate, right, that holds back other stuff to let smaller particles through. Well, if you think about this idea that I'm building essentially and preparing for something in the future. If we understand that we are eternal and that there is this life, right? Today you'll be with me in paradise. I'm prepared a place for you. My mansion has many rooms, right? I'm preparing this for you. And this idea of store up treasures in heaven. Well, what does that look like? Well, there's this thing after that's coming. And there's a hierarchy of that clearly. And there is a judgment of these things. And you go, okay, well, what is the primary thing? Well, are you listening to the king? or in this case, the general. Are you actually in line with? Are you in sync with? Are you doing this with me? I am the vine, you are the branches. Without me, you can do nothing. So this is a test. This is training. This is boot camp. There's a life beyond this. Well done, good and faithful servant. The ways of God are not the ways of the world. You might gain the whole world and lose your soul. I don't want to do that. So what is it? Well, what did Steve teach me? If you're interested, you could ask him yourself, and he would reveal these things to you. Well, how does it happen? Is it audible voice? Does he give me a book? No, it's not just about that. It's the revelation in this walking and talking and engagement. And what's amazing about it is a loving father who is interested in your every inquiry. It's hard to remind yourself of that when you're dealing with all kinds of difficulty. You're like, man, this thing is like, I'm drowning. Consider it pure joy when facing trials of many kinds. So you mean I have to learn how to drown? Well, you won't see me unless you do. Whew. Do you mean the wisdom that you have is that you would let me do that? That you would let me drown so that I would see it? You're not going to die. You need to experience this to understand who I am. There was a son who wanted his inheritance, and he wanted it before his father had passed. It's the story of the prodigal son. And the son wanted his inheritance, basically saying to the father, I wish you were dead. And the father knew, all right, I'll give it to you, lets him have it. And he goes off and he squanders it all in wild living. He doesn't have anything more. He gets a job feeding the pigs. And he literally looks at the slop of what he's eating, these pods. And he thinks of his father's house. And he says, the servants in my father's house eat better than this. He goes through this whole thing where his father finances his debauchery, knows in advance that this boy, he has to go his own way. He has to see the product of his own evil desires playing itself out. And what does he end up doing? He ends up seeing the father's nature and character. And from far off, he's like, well, if I just return, maybe he'll let me be one of his servants. You can't be one of his servants if you're a son. So what does he do? He walks back, and his father sees him far off, and he runs out to greet him. You imagine what the boy felt like? Oh, man, I literally screwed everything up. I feel that way personally right now. I failed you. I've sinned against you, God, my father and God. He's like, my son, he was dead, and now he is alive. What does being alive mean in that context? You understand the father's nature and character. You understand the father's house. So what ended up happening is he got a robe. His father kissed his neck. Father gave him a ring, and that ring was a signature of the family. And in order for him to be the one who passed the test, that went through this thing, had to know what it was like to be drowned, to come back, to understand the father's nature and character, was given the signet ring of the family. He's always been a son. But you had to understand what it meant because you're a representative of the king. The father in this scenario has authority, and his ring represents it. It's an impression. It's a signature. It's the signet ring. It is the impression of the father. But you can't wield that ring. You can't have that authority unless you understand his nature and character and you do it with him. So it all goes back to the garden, right? Certainly didn't say that, right? The serpent says to Eve, certainly didn't say that. You won't surely die. They didn't know what death was. And instead of going and asking the one that they walked with, hey, you told us not to eat from this tree. Is that true? Because the serpent guy who Satan has come into is telling us the opposite. Instead, they went their own way. They said, no, all right, I'll give you my authority and I'll eat from this tree of knowledge. And so we continue to eat from this tree of knowledge. And it's amazing, right? We're going our own way. And I think what's amazing about it is I just want to say thank you, Steve. Thank you, Jesus, right? That there's wisdom here. We've asked for wisdom. We've been given wisdom to understand that the ways of this world, what we think is success and advancing ourselves, is just not. His ways are not our ways. They're different. They're counterintuitive. This is upside down. Why do they seem counterintuitive? because there is a way that the world operates right now. It's upside down. He's turning it all right side up, right? Well, what does that do? It's you. It's the decisions you make in a certain nature and character. So why did God create? He created his man so that he would rule and reign with him in the fullness of his nature and character. Hey, well, I'd like to know what your nature and character is. And then I want to hold each thought captive so you can say, hey, what do we do next? And one of the things I want to know, Lord, is how do we animate this tool, this crypto? How do we animate this new financial system in a way that actually reflects your nature and character, has truth in the transaction, and is not something that exploits and extracts? It's not abstracted stealing. It's something that actually is blessing, because that's the hope that good people have, is that this is not a scam, that this is not a Ponzi, that this is not a thing, but that it actually could represent 12 basketfuls left over. Folks, Happy New Year to you. We're living in the future. 2025. It's going to be an interesting year. Could be an incredible one. But it really is about the choices that you make and how you see things. And so I just encourage you, if you're interested, ask him yourself. And the peace of God that transcends all understanding will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Folks, have a good weekend. Take care of yourself and don't mess with Texas.